I'm going to show you another Octopus game where a knight dominates major pieces. Remember to click on that subscribe button and let's get on with the game. Okay, so I was flicking through some old games and some games by Nimzowitsch, the quite controversial player from the early decades of the 20th century. Of course, he wrote this classic work, My System, where he basically expounded his beliefs on the chessboard, and he was very, very dogmatic. This was his opening, the Nimzo-Indian, and this is pretty good. If he has one legacy in his life, not just My System, but this opening, then it's a pretty good one, and you know, one of the most respectable openings to this day with black. So this game was played actually in a simultaneous exhibition where Nimzowitsch has the black pieces. He must have, maybe he played all black, I don't know, in this Simul. Maybe he alternated colours. But his opponent, Walter Michel, this is played in Bern in Switzerland, and Michel plays E3, the so-called Rubinstein system. Very solid, very respectable, and knight E2. And this is actually how Rubinstein liked to play it. You can play with bishop D3 as well, but Rubinstein liked to play knight E2 to protect the knight on C3. And the way that Nimzowitsch plays this is really, you know, one of the main lines to this day, actually. After A3, of course, you can put the bishop back, but Nimzowitsch wants to gain time here and play against White's isolated queen's pawn. And famously, this line was played in Korchnoi-Karpov from their match in Baguio 1978. Korchnoi played bishop E3 in this position, which I think is the best move, keeping the tension, and but black should be okay there. But instead, here Nimzowitsch's opponent played D5. Well, this liquidates minor pieces straight away, and you can see that it's an almost symmetrical pawn structure. And this is a good move, of course, to get rid of one of White's two bishops, attacking here. And this position, objectively, is just equal. But Nimzowitsch proves that you've still got to get this position right, and you still have to play accurately in order to achieve a draw against him. So the best move here must be bishop E3. Let's just plant that bishop on a nice square covered by a pawn, and I think the position is level there. But rook E1 was played, which seemingly looks like a good move because you gain time against the queen. But actually Nimzowitsch comes up with a clever move here. Instead of moving the queen, he plays his rook over. And obviously rook takes queen allows rook takes queen and mate, and something like this isn't very good either, because that would also be mate next move. So suddenly White had to compromise and play bishop here. So you can see that, well, the bishop simply isn't very well placed on D2. It's when White is pinned here. And that gives black a chance to take the initiative. If White can just step out here, get the queen out, then he'll be absolutely fine. But after knight e5, things start to get problematic, and this is the moment when the knight starts to turn into an octopus. So the knight lands on d3. This isn't actually winning material straight away because of the pin. There's a threat here, so that this rook just nudged to the side to protect the pawn on f2. So it's black's move. So as I said, knight takes rook impossible because of the pin. And here, Nimzowitsch, remember this is a simul, Nimzowitsch sees a very nice idea to penetrate with his queen. But actually, he probably should have just played his rook to d6 and doubled straight away on the d file. And I think in that case, black has a promising position. Instead he played queen g4, which looks very tempting. I think if you were, playing in a simul, flashing around, playing quickly, then this looks really attractive, because after the rook on c1 moves, now of course the rook is threatened, and Nimzowitsch came in with a queen. So that knight, this is the classic Octopus position. If you think back to the game between Karpov and Kasparov that I showed the other day, or the game between Karyakin and Carlsen, that knight dominates the E and C files, preventing white's rooks from occupying those files. And this looks tremendous for black. In fact, after queen b1 and then bishop e3, the queen isn't doing much on e2. In fact, worse than that, it actually gives white time to double on the e file. So the knight is protected, so the queen just gets driven away. It's a pity. Threat. Well, not quite a threat here actually. First of all, b6. After rook takes knight, there's a very nice x-ray. You can play queen takes rook. So if rook takes, then rook takes rook mate, and mate soon, or queen takes and rook takes, followed by winning the queen. So after b6, f3 was played by white. Now I don't like f3. I mean, it means after f3 then rook takes knight is a threat, but I think to cure the back rank problem, it's much better to play h3. It's these tiny differences that make a massive difference eventually. h3, of course, creates an escape square for the king, and it means that the bishop is still supported by the pawn on f2. That's very important. Minor pieces need good protection. But f3 played, and that feels loose to me. Rook takes knight is now a threat. That was covered by the queen. The queen came out, and h6, but at the moment it's not clear what either side should be doing. The knight is protected by 1, 2, 3 pieces and attacked by 1, 2, 3 pieces. So black is holding that knight, but the pin is annoying. You can't move the knight away very easily, not unless there's some big attack. What exactly do both sides do here? Well, Nimzowitsch just brought his king to safety. Now, perhaps white has drifted his king into the middle. Perhaps he was dreaming at some point of playing the king to e2, but of course queen takes g2 would be decisive. So for the moment white is waiting. And so is Nimzowitsch, brings the rook up, and now b4. Now Nimzowitsch starts to make some moves here. h5, good move, because this puts some doubt into white's mind, or how far is this pawn to go, going to move? Is it going to go all the way down to h3 to undermine the position of the pawn on f3? Should we block the pawn with h4? Should we block the pawn on h3 with h3. Does that weaken the g3 square? So suddenly there are lots of questions arise after the good old h-pawn advances. I love using the h-pawn because it doesn't really compromise black's king position. It'd be very different if black had decided to advance the f-pawn, well, as white has done. In any case, at the moment, f5 isn't on because the knights will be en prise. So white has a big decision to make here. Remember, we're at move 29 when the Simul player is starting to go around quicker and quicker because some people have lost already. There's pressure on you. What do you do? Well, here white decides to play g3. He seems to be fixated with the idea of playing king e2 to try and win that knight. But this is incredibly risky because it weakens the h3, the f3 pawn. And after queen f5, that queen wants to head here. King e2, and now the knight moves away. Knight e5 was under fire, but its job has is over on d3, and the f3 pawn is now under fire. So you can see how g3 was just very weakening actually, but white was obviously tempted by trying to win that knight on d3. So if rook takes rook, then black plays queen takes pawn, and white's king, well, black has won a pawn and white's king obviously in massive trouble as well. Let's go back. So knight e5 just played. Bishop f4 to block the attack here. And Nimzowitsch exchanges one pair of rooks. Doesn't exchange again, but of course keeps the rooks on the board because the king is staggering around in the middle of the board like a drunken man. Queen attacked. Obviously queen takes knight will be met by rook e6, winning the queen through that pin. So the queen steps to d4, and the knight comes back to g6. So this might seem quite a climb down. The knight has again transformed from being a knight to an octopus, and now it's gone back to being a knight again. But actually it does a very good job of protecting black's king when the queen and the rook start to go wandering, and this is very unpleasant for white. You can see that rook is potentially coming down the c-file, the queen is attacking from the other side of the board, and the king goes up. Here rook c8 is the best move with the option to attack on the e-file, but queen f1 doesn't look too shabby. White's king in desperate trouble. White has managed to expel the queen, but that king can't find its way home. There's a song with that title. Rook c2 coming in again. So Nimzowitsch is just poking and probing, but he can do so with a clear conscience because his king is completely safe. This is the essential difference between the two positions. And here white decides to take on f7. It's very difficult to suggest good moves here, it has to be said. Incredibly, my machine thinks that white is actually holding this position, which I find extraordinary because there is still no real attack on black's king, and black is just playing with these heavy pieces, you know, moving around white's king. I think, you know, if you're a machine then you might be able to hold this position, but for a human it's nigh on impossible. And sooner or later things start to drop off. King staggers up the board. Queen e2 is a strong move here, but this is also pretty good. And now king e6, and white actually manages to finish off very quickly here. The king has gone just a bit too far in this position, and rook c7 check was the final move. If bishop takes rook, then queen e7 and the knight, or the octopus, or whatever you want to call it, plays a supporting role to the queen, giving checkmate on e7. Well, this was not as spectacular, of course, as the Karjakin-Carlsen or Karpov-Kasparov games. Nevertheless, I still think it's a pretty good illustration of the octopus and what a true octopus does, which is to dominate white's major pieces. And yes, queen g4 played here, but rook d6 would have been much better. And yes, that is a true octopus position. Well, if you've got suggestions for other octopus games, then do contact me on the channel, of course, in the comments section. I'd be very interested to learn of your thoughts on that one. Thanks for watching.